everyone, my name is Nicole and this is Nikkie's channel. I'm on my 4th year living in Korea and I'm advanced at Korean now. So I feel like I have some really helpful advice and tips for those who are just beginning Korean or are in their beginning stages of learning Korean. Considering how much time it takes to learn Korean, I think it's really important to get some time efficient and effective methods for studying Korean. If you're interested in watching more content about Korea, culture, and language, hit the subscribe button. Okay, so the first step in learning Korean is to learn Hangul. So if you've already learned Hangul, you can skip to this point in the video. Alright, so it is so important to learn Hangul first because romanization is just not an effective way to speak Korean. You're going to sound awkward and you're definitely not going to sound like a native speaker if you're using romanization. And that's because there are many sounds in Korean that don't have a way of being spelt properly in English. But don't worry too much because it's not going to take too long to catch on to the basics of Hangul. Just keep in mind that even though it doesn't take too long to catch on to the basics of Hangul, your pronunciation is not going to be great until you get a lot of listening and reading practice in. So the first method I would suggest for learning Hangul is to do so from an app. And do it with an app that has the audio. So make sure that you're listening and echoing the pronunciation that they're giving. Because, like I said, it is not effective to learn the pronunciation from how it is written in English. So here are some apps that I would suggest checking out. Okay, so I would look through the different apps and find which method works best for you. Which app is gelling best with how you learn. Because some apps are going to work better for others, and I think that might depend on your learning style. Okay, the second method for learning Hangul is to do so by watching videos on YouTube, for example, and echoing the sounds they are making while writing the letters. So make sure that you're learning the stroke order for writing the letters. I don't think they are really too strict about how you write the letters in Korean, in my opinion, but it is good to learn how you're supposed to write them. And if you're more of like an artsy creative person, maybe you want to practice different ways you could stylize the way you're writing. You may also want to look up the tongue placement for the sounds in Korean because this will help you pronounce the letters better. Some of these sounds are going to sound very similar to your ear as a native English speaker if you're a native English speaker. But they're going to sound very different to a native Korean's ears. So because this is their language, of course, they can hear the distinction between the different letters very easily. Whereas, for example, when I was first learning Korean, some of those sounds sounded so similar. It was hard for me to distinguish. I would say something in Korean to someone and they would be like, huh?
Can I help you?
Yeah, I'm ready to order.
What do you have?
I'll take a...
What did you say?
And then they would be like, oh! And then they would say it back to me in what sounded like exactly what I said. But no, there is a difference there. And they heard the difference, but I had not yet picked up the ability to hear this difference. So this is why it's important to look at the tongue placement in the mouth when they're making the sounds. And any advice you can get on how Korean natives make these sounds. This is probably partly why there are some English speakers that I've met that said, oh, yeah, I can speak Korean, like Hangul was so easy to learn. But then when they start speaking in Korean and reading things in Korean, I notice how bad their pronunciation is. And so that's why it's really important to be humble when you're in these beginning stages, because you are not yet going to hear the mistakes you're making. but a native speaker will of course hear these mistakes you're making. And someone also who is more advanced at Korean might hear the mistakes that you're making. Okay, so once you've learned Hangul, the next step is to build up your vocabulary base. So, I will start with vocabulary. My advice would be to look up the 100 to 500 most useful Korean words and begin learning from this list. It might sound daunting, but look at it this way. If you learn 10 words a day, you can learn 100 words in 10 days. Likewise, you can learn 300 words in about a month. These words won't be too difficult to retain because you will be constantly hearing or using these words as you progress in Korean. There are many methods for learning vocabulary, but the way I used was Nikkie. So it is a spaced repetition app. This method exposes you to the word until the knowledge is completely learned. Okay, so when you add a card, you can see here, there is the front of the card, the back of the card, and you can put tags here, which I don't ever do tags, but that's a button there. Okay, and here you can see that you can select the type. So I do basic and reversed card. So this means that I'm going to see the front of the card sometimes, and sometimes I'm going to see the back of the card. So I can learn the word through translating it from English, and I can learn the word from translating the Korean back into English. And there's also a way to put pictures and audio onto the cards if you have that kind of time, right? Just to add, okay, so I recently switched phones and I went from an Android to an iPhone. So I had a bunch of decks on my old phone, but I decided to start from scratch anyway. So I'm going to show you here. I'm doing a 30-day challenge right now, so I want to learn 300 more words, right? So I just click onto my deck here. So here is a word, and the word is kyokri-hada. Kyokri-hada. And here I have a scratch pad, which is an option you can put, and if you can see it under settings here. You can pop on the scratch pad. So I use this scratch pad to just write in the Korean word, okay? So I'm very messy at writing on these phones, but whatever. Okay, because basically you just want the practice, so it doesn't matter how pretty it is as long as you know that you're writing it correctly, right? All right, so you practice writing and you say, okay, so what is this in English? This word means isolate, separate, quarantine. By the way, why do I have this word in my deck? Because I'm learning Korean words right now from the Netflix series Sweet Home. So good, totally worth checking out. So you flip over the card and you see the answer here. So yes, isolate, separate, quarantine, right? And then you can rate here how well you knew the word. So if I didn't know the word, I press again, and it has a time here. It's going to show it to me again in 1 minute. Good, it'll show me in 1 day. Easy, 4 days. Now, as you go along and as the app recognizes that this word is more and more cemented into your knowledge, then it will show you these times become longer and longer. So sometimes easy can be as long as a month. Or even, I think I've even seen it be, I think it also goes up to a year. It can go very long times when the app recognizes that, hey, you really know this word at this point, so you don't need to see this word again. So that is why this app and spaced repetition apps are helpful in general. I have not used any other spaced repetition app, so I can't really speak to the other ones that are out there. But I can recommend Nikkie because I think this has been a really effective way for me to learn the vocabulary that I need to know. And it's great if you are doing something like I'm doing this 30-day challenge. Hey, I want to learn 300 words, so I'm going to study 10 words a day, add 10 words into that flashcard app a day, and all of it ends up adding up, right? And when I'm commuting, I'm reviewing all those flashcards, right? And if you have friends that are also learning a language, or if you're in a class and you can make friends in that class, maybe you can create a group chat where you're all doing a challenge together. So you're all learning the words together. So right now I'm doing this 30-day challenge with 2 of my friends. So every day we text the group the 10 words that we learned that day, the 10 words that we're adding to our flashcard app. And this is so great because it gives more motivation, and I'm sure it probably is lighting up those reward centers in the brain that are like very useful to utilize when learning. Okay, but if you are not into apps or using these kind of flashcard decks on your computer, you can of course get the physical flashcards, do it old school style. Write down those words on paper flashcards and review those whenever you have time. So that is of course a method that you can use, right? My next advice is to get a notebook. So I have 2 different types of notebooks. I have my messy notebook. This is basically an everyday notebook you can get. I buy the cheapest notebook that is still kind of pretty to look at. And I use this notebook to write down the words I'm learning a bajillion times. Write down the example sentences. Write down whatever, and not put too much thought into how pretty my writing's looking. Not put too much thought into what I'm putting down on the page. This is just a notebook for all your practicing purposes, something that later on you can throw away, okay? The second notebook I have is the pretty notebook. So this is the notebook that I spent a little bit more money on, but it's up to you, like if you have the money to spend on a prettier notebook or you just want to get a cheaper notebook and make it pretty. But it's a notebook that you want to go to, a notebook that makes you happy, and a notebook where you're a little bit more organized with it. So this is the notebook I use to write down the words that I'm going to methodically go through and learn every single one of those words. And in my pretty notebook, I also write down the grammar points. But again, I'm methodically going through them. I'm really learning what I'm writing down in here. Just to give you an example, in this notebook, I was reviewing the intermediate grammar points. So here I put a grammar point, I highlight it, and I write down the meanings, and then I put a little arrow to the example sentences. So this is just a way that you can do it. Set it up with however you learn best. So for this notebook, I write down grammar points, example sentences from books and online, and all the vocabulary. But this notebook is things that I'm going to learn everything in. Whereas my other notebook is the notebook that I'm going to practice with, and I don't have to be so anxious about making sure that I know everything in this book. It is just for practice. So I can give this notebook to my teacher to correct, my friend, my language partner to correct the sentences, and I don't have to worry about, oh my god, the paper is so marked up, because who cares? This one is going to be marked up, and that's great. This one, on the other hand, is going to be the one that is you can be more particular about, you can be really organized and more of a perfectionist about. So when I learn vocabulary, I write it down in the flashcards, I write it down in my notebook, and oftentimes I will practice writing it over and over again. That way, the writing becomes part of my muscle memory, and it becomes easier to write and remember the spelling. And also, a tip is to double or triple check your spelling. Because sometimes I've written down a word and I didn't double or triple check that spelling, and I wrote down the wrong spelling for the word. So then I learned the wrong spelling of the word, and how annoying is that when you're going to be reviewing this word over and over and over again. So double, triple check your spelling when you're writing it down. And another tip is, if you like, you can write the word on 2 lines instead of 1 line. So write the word a bit bigger so you can really differentiate what letters that you're writing in there. So if you're interested to see more content related to Korea, Korean culture, or the Korean language, please hit the subscribe button. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.